Arizona is bigger and emptier than the postcards let on. Most visitors see Phoenix, the Grand Canyon, and maybe Sedona, and that's the whole trip. The rest of the state is flat, hot, and dotted with places that boomed and died inside a single human lifetime. One quick correction first. There's a story going around about scientists cracking a set of century-old stone maps in the Superstition Mountains. That did not happen. What actually happened is stranger. A set of carved rocks with no verified origin somehow funded a stock company and decades of desert searches. We're walking through the towns that story left behind, including a Christmas village that baked in the desert with no snow ever, a roadside zoo built over a mass grave, and a locked ghost town where bats pour out of a mine shaft every evening. Stick around for number 1, a town that died 3 separate times at the foot of the most dangerous mountain range in the Southwest. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button because we post stories like this every week. Today, 10 of the strangest towns in Arizona. Let's get into it. Number 10, Nothing. The town that was honest about it. Here's the joke first. In 1977, a man named Richard Buddy Kenworthy set up shop on a bare stretch of U.S. Route 93 between Wickenburg and Wickiup, elevation 3,269 feet, and named the place Nothing. Locals told travelers it got named by a bunch of drunks. At its biggest, Nothing had a bar called the Tain't Much Ado, a store, a taco stand, and a gas station, betting on the gamblers and truckers running between Phoenix and Las Vegas. A fire tore through the businesses in 1988. Kenworthy rebuilt the store and the garage, but the traffic never really came back, and he walked away in 2005. Someone else tried again in 2009, opening a pizza place with RV hookups. That lasted about 2 years. The Arizona Department of Transportation even installed one of its 4 motorist call boxes here, which tells you exactly how much was actually out there. The Old Town sign read in full civic seriousness that the citizens of Nothing were full of hope, faith, and belief in the work ethic, and that through the years they had worked at nothing for nothing. That sign outlived the town. The convenience store, sincerely named the All-Mart, still has population 4 painted on it for 4 people who left a long time ago. You can pull off the highway and walk through it today. Boarded windows, a crumbling fence, no water, no shade. A town built entirely on a joke, and the joke is the only part still standing. Number 9, why? The town named after a loophole. Town. 2 highways meet at a Y-shaped junction in Pima County, just north of Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in some of the most photogenic cactus country in North America. And a handful of services grew up around that fork to catch traffic heading toward the Mexican border and down to Rocky Point. When it came time to register a name, the obvious choice was staring at everyone on the map. The letter Y. The story goes that Arizona required town names to have at least 3 letters, so instead of Y, the founders spelled it out as Y. Here's the wild part. Decades later, the State Highway Department decided the Y junction itself was a safety hazard and rebuilt it as an ordinary intersection further south. The shape the town is named after does not exist anymore. Y is still a living community today, not a ghost town at all, population 122 at the last census, sitting outside any school district, so the county superintendent has to arrange busing for its kids. It shows up regularly on lists of the country's most unusual place names, and it earns the spot honestly. A green highway sign asking a question next to a fork in the road that got bulldozed years ago, out on a long, straight, empty stretch of 2-lane blacktop with saguaro to the horizon in every direction. Border Patrol trucks pass through more often than tourists do. Nobody ever got around to changing the name. Number 8, the High Jolly Pyramid in Quartzsite. In the middle of a dirt cemetery, a block off the highway and surrounded by one of the biggest flea markets in the country, stands a stone pyramid. 9 feet on a side, 8 feet tall, topped with a 2-foot steel camel facing west, with the Kofa and Plumosa ranges sitting on the horizon behind it. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it marks the first of 124 graves in the cemetery's Old Pioneer section. The grave belongs to a man named Haji Ali, born Philip Tedrow, who took the name Haji Ali after converting to Islam and making the pilgrimage to Mecca. Americans just called him High Jolly. Here's the thing. High Jolly came to the United States in 1856 as part of the U.S. Army Camel Corps, an experiment personally championed by Jefferson Davis while Davis was still Secretary of War, years before he became President of the Confederacy. The idea was that camels could cross the harsh desert Southwest better than horses or mules ever could. And on the Beale Wagon Road expedition, they actually did. But the Civil War took Davis out of Washington. The program lost its patron, and the surviving camels were auctioned off or turned loose in the desert. High Jolly stayed, working as a prospector, freight hauler, and scout around Quartzsite for another 4 decades, until he died there in December of 1902. A plaque at the site describes him as more than 30 years of faithful aid to the U.S. government. The locals built him a pyramid, and in 1935, the Arizona Highway Department adopted the grave as an official monument, with Governor Benjamin Moore dedicating it in person. The last confirmed sighting of the wild camels his experiment left behind was in 1942. They outlived Jefferson Davis. They outlived High Jolly. They very nearly outlived the highway department that built his tomb. The pyramid is still there today, still the most visited spot in Quartzsite. Dead quiet most of the year and standing a few hundred yards from where tens of thousands of RVs park every winter for the swap meet. Walk back toward the highway and that quiet ends all at once. The flea market noise rushing back in like someone turned the volume on. Number 7. Santa Claus. Christmas, left out in the sun. In 1937, a California real estate agent named Nina Talbot bought about 80 acres of raw Mojave Desert 14 miles northwest of Kingman, among the Joshua trees and strange rock formations of that stretch of highway. And instead of just selling the lots, she built a Christmas village on top of them. Peppermint striped buildings, a children's train, Cinderella's dollhouse, a post office called Santa's Workshop where kids could get their mail postmarked from a town named Santa Claus any day of the year. A restaurant good enough that Duncan Hines rated it among the best in the region, and good enough that science fiction writer Robert Heinlein wrote a short story about a meal served there. Talbot's pitch was simple. Nobody would drive out to look at raw desert lots, but they would absolutely drive out to see Santa Claus, and once they were there, maybe they'd buy the land around him too. Here's the problem. Nobody ever bought the land. The only people who lived in Santa Claus were the people who worked there. The whole point of the place was Christmas with no snow, ever, and that irony ran for 50 years. Talbot sold out after 12 years in 1949. The businesses limped along on Route 66 traffic for decades until the interstate rerouted around them and the last shops closed in 1995. By 1983, the owner was trying to sell the entire town for $95,000. He couldn't. The price dropped to $52,500 by 1988, and there were still no buyers. For years after that, Santa Claus sat there anyway. A sun-bleached, graffiti-covered Christmas village slowly baking in the desert, with a derailed pink children's train sitting next to the ruins, the only sound the wind off the highway. That image is gone now. The last structures were torn down in the winter of 2021 into 2022, right around mile markers 57 and 58 on US 93. A stretch of road easy enough to blow straight past even when the buildings were standing. What's left today is foundations and bare ground. A woman built a permanent Christmas to sell real estate no one wanted, and the only thing that actually sold in the end was the postmark. Number 6. Arcosanti. The city that is 5% finished. In 1970, an Italian architect named Paolo Soleri broke ground on a high desert mesa above a river canyon, roughly 70 miles north of Phoenix, just off Interstate 17, building a city designed to hold 5,000 people on a footprint of 20 to 25 acres inside an 860-acre preserve, funded by the nonprofit Cassanti Foundation he had started 5 years earlier. He called the idea arcology, architecture plus ecology, and the pitch was that suburban sprawl was a design failure, that people could live denser and closer, without cars, inside a single structure built into the landscape. Here's the wild part. 56 years later, the population still sits somewhere between 50 and 150 people, mostly students and volunteers. The last major building was finished in 1989. By most estimates, the project is about 5% complete. It's funded almost entirely by tours and by the sale of Soleri-designed ceramic and bronze windbells, cast in a foundry on site. so the whole place runs to a constant low ringing that never quite stops. Somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 volunteers have passed through building it over the decades, trading a few weeks of labor for workshops in construction, ceramics, and bronze casting in exchange for a hand in Solari's unfinished plan. Solari had studied under Frank Lloyd Wright, and the two split over philosophy inside 18 months. Wright wanted to build outward, Solari wanted to build upward. Solari spent the rest of his life proving his version, one concrete panel at a time, cast in beds of desert silt so the buildings would match the color of the land around them. He died in 2013 with his prototype city still a fraction of the plan. It's still there. Tours still run, drawing something like 40 to 50,000 visitors a year. The bells still get poured. At the current rate of construction, someone once calculated it would take roughly 700 years to finish. Arcosanti isn't a ruin, and it isn't a failure either. It's a work in progress that outlived its architect and may very well outlive everyone watching this. If you're enjoying this so far, drop a thumbs up and tell us in the comments which of these you'd actually want to visit: the pyramid, the Christmas ruins, or the unfinished city. We read everyone, we're only halfway through this list, and it's about to get considerably darker. Number 5, Swansea, the town built to impress investors. Copper had been known in this stretch of the Buckskin Mountains, roughly 30 miles from Parker down rough desert track, since the 1860s, but the location was too remote to matter until the railroad reached Parker in 1904. Two miners, Newton Evans and Thomas Jefferson Kerrigan, saw their opening. By the end of 1908, they had a 350-ton furnace under construction, along with a 3.5-mile water pipeline hauled in from the Bill Williams River. By 1909, the population had reached 500. A post office had opened under the name Swansea, honoring the Welsh town their ore used to be shipped to, and a short-line railroad was running ore and passengers in from Bouse. Here's the thing that makes this one strange. Swansea, out in the middle of nowhere, with water piped in from miles away, somehow supported an electric light company, 2 cemeteries, a saloon, theaters, and a Ford dealership. That was the point. The promoter running the operation, George Mitchell, spent heavily on anything that made the town look like a going concern to potential investors, instead of on the actual business of getting ore out of the ground efficiently. Production was costing about 3 cents a pound more than copper was selling for. No amount of nice storefronts fixes that math, and there's a bitter irony underneath it. Mitchell's own smelter never even processed the ore, which got shipped off to Clarkdale, Humboldt, and Sasco instead. The company collapsed in 1911. A bigger company, Asarco, bought it in 1914 and made it profitable again for a couple of years, especially after Mitchell left in 1916. But post-war copper prices and then the Depression finished the job for good by 1937. The post office had already closed back in 1924. The Bureau of Land Management manages the site today with a marked walking loop through the ruins, no cell service, and a warning to carry your own water, and most visitors report having the entire place to themselves. What's left is the brick shell of the smelter and a long double row of gray plastered worker housing, empty concrete doorways facing the desert in a straight, silent line. A town built to look successful, standing exactly as long as the appearance did. Number 4. 2 Guns, the man who sold the skulls. Picture the ruins first. Stone zoo cages along the rim of a canyon, chicken wire and brick, the word mountain lions still faintly readable on one wall, and past them, a gash in the flat ground you don't even see until you're standing on the edge of it. That's Canyon Diablo, off Interstate 40 between Flagstaff and Winslow, a crossing point important enough that a National Old Trails highway was built over it in 1907. And this is what's left of a man named Harry E. Miller, who leased the property from Earl and Louise Cundiff in 1925 and rebuilt himself on the spot as an Apache chief he called Crazy Thunder, taking the settlement's new name from silent film star William S. Hart, whom he claimed to have worked with. Local legend held that 42 Apache men died here in 1878, trapped in a cave during a conflict with the Navajo when fires were lit at the entrance. Miller saw a business in that grave. He wired the cave for electric light, built fake stone ruins on top of it with hired Hopi labor, opened a concession stand by the entrance, and sold the skulls and bones he found inside as souvenirs to passing tourists. Here's the detail that stops people cold. He reportedly sold the remaining human and horse bones to a bone dealer in Winslow. This was already a working trading post before Miller arrived, catching whatever traffic crossed the canyon on wagons and then, after 1907, on the new highway itself. So the site had a legitimate business behind it before Miller ever turned it into a sideshow. In 1926, a dispute with Cundiff over the lease terms ended with Miller shooting the unarmed man dead. He was acquitted. What happened next felt to the people who told the story afterward, like justice arriving late. Miller was mauled by his own mountain lions and later bitten by one of his Gila monsters before he left Two Guns in the state for good. The site changed hands again in 1960, was rebuilt with a motel and a new zoo, got its own interstate exit, and then burned down completely in 1971, right as that interstate was finishing construction. About a dozen ruins remain today. The zoo cages, a gas station, an abandoned campground, no signage, no fence, nothing stopping you from walking straight in, elevation high enough that winter here means real cold and real snow, not just heat. Everything built on this spot since Miller has burned, failed, or been abandoned, which is exactly why the curse story stuck the way it did. A man built a tourist attraction on top of a massacre and sold the dead as souvenirs. The animals were the only ones who ever held him accountable. Number 3, Ruby, population 1. Ruby began in 1877 as a small gold and silver camp called Montana Camp, tucked into the oak and grass hills of Bear Valley near Arivaca and the Mexican border, and it stayed small and quiet, never topping 50 people for 35 years until a storekeeper renamed it after his wife in 1912. Then, between 1920 and 1922, it became the site of 3 separate double homicides that came to be known as the Ruby Murders. In February 1920, 2 brothers who had bought the local mercantile just 11 days earlier were shot dead during a robbery. In August 1921, the store's next owners, a husband and wife named Pearson, were shot in the same building, though their daughter and 2 other women in the house survived. In 1922, 2 arrested suspects escaped custody, killing 2 more men on the way out, and that triggered the largest manhunt in the history of the Southwest, including the first airplane ever used in an Arizona manhunt. Storekeepers who lived through it kept a pistol or rifle in every room of the house, in the store, and it is hard to blame them. And then, against all of that, the town kept booming. Under the Eagle Pitcher Lead Company, Ruby became one of Arizona's leading producers of zinc, lead, and silver, and its population climbed past 1,000 by the mid-1930s. The mine finally ran dry in 1940, and within a year the town had emptied completely. Here's what makes Ruby different from almost everything else on this list. It's a listed National Historic Place, reachable only down a dirt road where the GPS is known to be unreliable, past a gate that's only open on posted days with an admission fee, and camping and fishing are allowed on site for anyone who wants to stay past dark. About 20 buildings are still standing, including a 1916 schoolhouse with its chalkboard still hanging on the walls. A caretaker lives on site today, in the old county courthouse, a building that still has bullet holes in one wall, ringed by small lakes and sand dunes made from decades of mine tailings. And in the abandoned mine shaft above town lives a colony of Mexican free-tailed bats, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, that pours out of the opening every evening at dusk in a column you can hear before you can see it. One caretaker described lying flat on the ground just to watch it pass directly over him. 6 murders, the largest manhunt in the Southwest, a 15-year boom, and then silence. And a sign at the gate that just says, Ruby, population 1, because somebody still chooses to live there, alone, with the bats and the bullet holes for company. Number 2. Vulture City. The Hanging Tree. In 1863, a prospector named Henry Wickenburg found a gold-bearing quartz outcrop roughly 12 miles southwest of the town that would eventually take his name, and it turned into the richest gold mine Arizona has ever produced. Between 1863 and 1942, the Vulture mine yielded 340,000 ounces of gold and 260,000 ounces of silver, an amount a state historical marker puts it somewhere north of $200 million, with the caveat that nobody actually knows the real total because so much of it was stolen. The town around the mine grew to roughly 5,000 people, with dormitories, a mess hall, a school, a post office established in 1880 with Wickenburg himself as the first postmaster, and an 80 stamp mill, all set against wide-open Sonoran desert, saguaro and ironwood scrub under a huge sky. Here's the wild part. The ore was rich enough that miners smuggled it out constantly, in their boots, their lunch pails, their clothing, and the company's answer wasn't a courtroom. It was a tree. An ironwood, standing right next to the mine owner's own cabin, in plain view of everyone walking to work. 18 men are reported to have been hanged from it for stealing ore. The assay office, built in 1884, was constructed out of stone hauled straight from the mine, rock that reportedly still holds thousands of dollars in gold locked inside its own walls. The mine changed hands over and over across those decades, plagued by theft, unreliable water, and one financial scandal after another, and finally ran until 1942, when wartime priorities shut it down for good. Some accounts point to a presidential executive order, others to the War Production Board simply declaring it non-essential, but either way, the gold stopped that year. By then it had already helped found the town of Wickenburg and helped drive the early growth of farming around Phoenix. Wickenburg himself, the man whose name is on all of it, never got rich from any of it. He died broke, and there is something almost funny about that, given how much the tree beside his own cabin had done to protect his interests. The assay office is still standing today, along with the cookhouse, the brothel, the dynamite house, and the tree itself, with paid tours and staff running visitors through the whole site. A gold mine rich enough to help build an entire state, and it never once made the man who actually found it. Number 1, Goldfield. The town that refused to stay dead. You come around a bend on the Apache Trail and the mountain fills the entire windshield before the town does. A wall of banded volcanic rock, saguaro forest packed in at the base, rising straight up out of flat desert with no warning and no foothills to soften it. Below it, a narrow-gauge train, 36 inches wide, is running its mile-and-a-half loop, an engine and a caboose circling the same ground over and over. Gunfights are getting reenacted on schedule. Somewhere past the last building, past the mine tours and the saloon and the gift shop, the desert goes completely silent under 3,000 feet of rock, the Apache called the Devil's Playground. That's Goldfield, and that mountain range is the Superstitions. Gold was found here in 1892 by Colin Hakes, Riley Morse, and the Merrill brothers near Apache Junction, in a stretch of desert where even the county records can't fully agree with each other on the jurisdiction line. The town that grew up around the strike hit a population of roughly 4,000 within a year, with 3 saloons, a brewery, a school, and its own post office by October of 1893. Here's the thing that makes Goldfield different from a normal boomtown story. The gold strike didn't happen in a vacuum. Stories of a lost Spanish mine somewhere in these mountains had already been circulating for years, and the two stories fed each other, pulling in prospectors, promoters, and treasure hunters all at once. The vein faulted in 1897, and the town emptied. A territorial official named George Young, acting governor of Arizona at the time, brought it back around 1910, renamed it Youngsburg after himself, and installed modern cyanide processing to squeeze more gold out of ore the original miners couldn't touch. Its post office ran from 1921 to 1926, and then Young died in a mining accident in 1926, and the town emptied a second time. Fire took what was left after that. In 1984, a ghost town enthusiast named Bob Scoose bought the wreckage and spent years rebuilding the 1890s town by hand, on the same ground you're walking through today, running that narrow-gauge railroad, the only one of its kind still operating anywhere in Arizona. A few minutes down the same stretch of road sits the Superstition Mountain Museum, home to roughly 24 treasure maps tied to that same lost mine legend, some of them carved directly into stone, including the very stones this video started with, on loan and behind glass, still waiting for someone to prove what they actually are. Next door sits the relocated Elvis Presley Chapel, salvaged from a movie set that burned to the ground in 2004. Not one of those maps has ever led anyone to gold. What the mountain has produced over more than a century is a long list of searchers who went in after that mine and did not come back out. 3 deaths and 3 rebirths, a legend nobody has ever verified, and a wall of rock that has outlasted every promoter, every renaming, and every fire anyone ever set against it. That mountain was never the mystery. The mystery was always what people were willing to do underneath it. Arizona's desert does not preserve things gently, and it never has. It bakes them, burns them, or buries them, and every so often leaves the sign standing anyway, just to make sure somebody notices. For me, it's Ruby, a caretaker sleeping in a bullet-scarred courthouse, alone, with a colony of bats for neighbors. That one stays with you. Tell us in the comments which of these 10 surprised you most, or which town we missed. If forgotten history like this is what you're after, subscribe, because there's another one of these towns waiting past the next